why did North America never receive the Levin front? For those who don't know, the 86 received two front-end models, one for the Corolla Levin and one for the Sprinter Trueno, with them both receiving various names abroad. Unlike Japan, the rest of the world received one or the other, namely the pop-up front in North America and the fixed light front pretty much everywhere else. But when you really think about it, the weirder it seems. Why would they spend all this money building an elaborate and expensive flippy-uppy headlight design if they were just going to be putting them on SR5 models, which was more or less a crummy, spit-shined E7 Corolla? Well, it was actually illegal. To explain that, we need to go back in time. Have you ever noticed that every single headlight was at one point the exact same? For example, a 1969 Mustang and a 240Z have identical headlights. I wouldn't be too surprised if you haven't. Car manufacturers actually did a pretty good job at disguising them with elaborate body lines or even hiding them behind a grille. This is because of a little something called sealed beam headlights and the DOT, which stands for... I don't know what it stands for. In the 1940s, the US Department of Transportation standardized headlights, so every single car would have the same two 7-inch round headlights. This was obviously pretty convenient, as it made finding replacements readily available. Part stores would only have to stock one single type of headlight, but this obviously developed into a little bit of a challenge for automakers to try and differentiate their car from the rest of the market. They had to do this through unique styling and eventually pushing for newer designs such as having 4 smaller headlights and eventually rectangular headlights. This is where our little Corolla comes in. The year is 1983, which is clearly a worse year than 1984. That one had a whole book named after it. The Corolla was delivered to North American shores with a pop-up front and abroad with a fixed light front. But this brings us back to the original question. Why? Well, sealed beam headlights. It actually would have been illegal for them to bring over the Levin front, as their bespoke headlights wouldn't be accepted by the DOT. Automakers would typically get around this with a little bit of creativity. This is pretty apparent with the 3rd gen Civic, or in Toyota's case, the E80 series Corolla. They made plastic inserts for the North American cars, which used the standard sealed beam lights, but opted for their own lights abroad. Meaning there's an alternative timeline where we got some sort of scary, sunk-eyed homunculus of a Levin front end in North America. Ugh. Terrifying. This was eventually lifted in 1984, allowing automakers to use their own headlights that were deemed up to the DOT standard. But by this point, I imagine Toyota didn't want to go through the expensive process of bringing in their fixed lights to the DOT standard, as they barely cared enough about these cars to bring over more than a handful. Not to mention that they'd also be making an entirely new bumper. Although the ban was lifted in 1984, this wouldn't be the end for these rectangular lights, as since they're cheap, namely, it was pretty easy for them to use across other cars. The Mark II, Mark III Supra, AW11, Ae86, Ae92, so on and so forth. So now every time you see a Levin front end being price hiked by some shady JDM importer, you now know that these bastards are to blame. And hopefully you now share the burden of never being able to look at pre-1984 headlights the same. Thanks for watching.